There's a moment, a flicker, really, right before an interview begins. Cameras are already rolling, the mics are live, and the subject of scrutiny adjusts in their seat. That flicker is where truth either hides or steps forward. When Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana appeared for an interview with CNN's Casey Hunt, we weren't just watching a political Q&A. We were watching an ideological battleground. And Kennedy walked straight into it like a man who knew exactly where every landmine was buried, and still chose to walk. You might be wondering why any of this matters. Why should a single interview stir so much reaction? But that's the thing. This wasn't just an interview. It was a test. A test of truth in an age of performance, where headlines often matter more than context, and where every statement is judged not just by accuracy, but by which side it favors. That day, the gotcha game was in full force. Kennedy was questioned on a nominee accused of advising clients to defy court orders. Already we're treading into murky territory, because how many lawyers have stood in that impossible place where legality, morality, and loyalty all pull in different directions? But Kennedy didn't flinch. He didn't offer a clever spin. What he offered instead was simplicity. And in today's political climate, simplicity is revolutionary. He said, if your client tells you to ignore a judge's order, you quit. Period. That's it. No escape hatches, no excuses. Just an expectation that law must mean something, or it means nothing at all. And maybe that's the first reason why this moment mattered. In a world overflowing with nuance, grey areas, and backroom handshakes, Kennedy chose black and white. But this wasn't just about Boy's nomination. No, the conversation shifted fast. And that's where things really began to burn. They brought up Epstein. Suddenly, we weren't just talking about law, we were talking about secrets, power, and the kind of evil that makes you want to turn your head and pretend it isn't real. Jeffrey Epstein, a name soaked in scandal, abuse, and mystery. A man whose crimes haunt the corridors of elite society. And with his name comes one looming question. Who else was involved? It's a question that makes even the most confident public figures go quiet. But Casey Hunt didn't hesitate to ask it. Specifically, was Donald Trump one of those people Epstein trafficked underage girls to? And Kennedy? He didn't deflect. He didn't retaliate. He simply said what he knew, or more importantly, what he didn't know. I don't believe he was, he said, and you could feel the air thicken. He admitted the ties between Trump and Epstein were once real, that they had social connections. That much of it was in the past. But he also said something else, something rare. I don't know for sure. That alone separates Kennedy from the pack, because most people in his position would have done one of two things, either deny everything with absolute certainty, or evade the question altogether. But he didn't. He stood right there in the fog of uncertainty and let the truth breathe. He then turned the focus where it belonged. The American people deserve to know, and justice has to show us the receipts. That line stayed with me. Maybe because it wasn't just about Epstein. It was about something bigger, something that affects all of us. Trust. We live in a time where institutions have lost their grip on public confidence. The Justice Department, the media, the political elite, they've all asked for trust. But how do you trust a system that rarely offers transparency in return? Kennedy's words cut through that fog. Don't just tell us there's no one else. Prove it. And that right there. That's when I realized this wasn't a normal interview. This was a reckoning. In the second half of the episode, we'll break down the political climate surrounding the Epstein investigation, how both parties have used and abused the situation, and why Kennedy's position stands out. But before we get there, let me leave you with this thought. In an age where everyone's performing, isn't it refreshing, maybe even radical, to hear someone speak without the performance? Stick around, because in episode 2, we're pulling back even further, not just on Epstein, but on the web of silence that protects the powerful, and how sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is ask a simple question. Who knew? There's a strange kind of quiet that follows an avalanche. After the crash, after the chaos, after the screaming headlines and breaking news banners have faded. That's the moment we find ourselves in now, sitting in the silence after Jeffrey Epstein's death. A silence that feels manufactured, purposeful, as if someone turned the volume down just when we started asking the right questions. It's in that silence that Senator John Kennedy spoke up, not with rage, not with wild accusations, but with something that's even more unsettling in today's world: calm honesty. This isn't about defending Kennedy or glorifying his politics. This is about watching what happens when someone steps into that hush and says, "This isn't good enough. We need to know more." When Kennedy sat across from CNN's Casey Hunt, the questions turned sharp, pointed, surgical. And then, the bombshell. Are you confident that Donald Trump wasn't one of the people to whom these young girls were trafficked? That's the kind of question that halts the room. Not just for its content, but for what it implies. Allegations like that are political dynamite, and yet Kennedy didn't dodge. He didn't offer the polished answers we're used to hearing from politicians. What he said was simple, and for that very reason, powerful. I don't believe he was. A pause, but I don't know for a fact. That line should not be extraordinary. And yet in a world where public figures pretend to know everything, where pundits talk more than they listen, those 7 words hit like a sledgehammer. He didn't make himself the judge or jury. He didn't leap to defend or to condemn. He just did something few are willing to do anymore. He admitted that some things, especially the most important ones, require truth, not speculation. And he followed it up with the one demand no one in power seems willing to make: justice must show us the receipts. That wasn't just a call-out to the Department of Justice. That was a call-out to every institution that has played a part in this silence: the courts, the media, the elite, all of them. Because make no mistake, Epstein's crimes weren't committed in the dark. They happened in the open, in mansions, on jets, behind velvet ropes at billionaires' parties. And every step of the way, someone looked away. Someone let it happen. And someone, maybe a lot of someones, participated. So why is it, years later, we still don't have the full list? Why do we know the names of victims but not the names of clients? Let that question settle in your bones. There's something morally repugnant about that reversal. We've seen survivor testimonies dissected in courtrooms and on camera. We've seen documentaries and podcasts build careers off their pain. And yet the men who paid for their exploitation? The ones who made Epstein's business possible? They remain shadows. Ghosts. You feel that? That's the silence talking. That's the silence Kennedy disrupted, not with fireworks, but with clarity. He said this isn't a political issue, it's a moral one. And that's exactly right. Because when children are trafficked, when young women are groomed, silenced, discarded, we're not talking about liberal or conservative anymore. We're talking about human and inhuman. Right and wrong. You can't put that on a party banner. That's soul-level stuff. And Kennedy called it out. Not with slogans, not with outrage, but with words that carried the weight of knowing how corrupted power can become. This is no country for creepy old men. He said it with a smirk, sure, but the gravity was there. It wasn't just a clever line. It was a line in the sand. So let's ask the next question, the one that makes people shift in their seats. Who is benefiting from the silence? It's not just Epstein's ghost still haunting these rooms. It's the systems that allowed him to flourish. The donors, the gatekeepers, the celebrities and politicians who posed for photos but claim to know nothing. They don't want clarity, they want confusion, mistrust, division. Because when we're all fighting about left versus right, red versus blue, they keep their names out of the news cycle. They survive the storms because they built the shelters. And every time the public demands justice, the silence grows louder. Here's the irony. The louder people cry for the truth, the more sophisticated the cover-up becomes. Document dumps, legalese, ongoing investigations, missing footage, misplaced logs, and finally, the nuclear option, convincing the public it's old news. Nothing more to see here, but there's always more to see. And that's where Kennedy refused to play along. He didn't say he had the list. He didn't pretend to know all the answers. He simply reminded us that not knowing isn't the same as not caring. That's a crucial distinction. Because right now, too many politicians pretend indifference is wisdom, that not speaking is some kind of virtue. It's not. It's cowardice. And while Kennedy might not be everyone's ideal senator, while you might disagree with his policies or his style, on this issue, he did something deeply courageous. He showed up. He showed up in front of a national audience in an interview some thought would be a trap, and he told the truth as he saw it. No performance. No rehearsal. Just honesty. That matters. Especially now, because we are drowning in narratives, drowning in noise, drowning in people trying to spin the truth into something that serves them. And when someone comes along who speaks in a straight line, it shocks the system. That's what happened here. It shocked the system. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with unfinished business. There are still files we haven't seen, there are still names we don't know, and most importantly, there are still survivors waiting for justice. This can't become another scandal that fades with time, another entry in the long list of almosts, almost exposed, almost revealed, almost held accountable. The silence wants you to forget. It wants you numb, distracted. Don't let it win. Keep asking, keep demanding, and remember what Kennedy said, not because he's the hero of this story, but because in that moment he gave voice to a truth that transcends party lines and political careers. Show us the receipts. Until they do, we keep pushing, we keep remembering, we keep naming the silence for what it is, complicity. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us refuse to accept silence as the answer, the truth will have nowhere left to hide. By the time you've seen enough politicians spin, dodge, and duck their way through interviews, you start to believe that plain truth is extinct. And then, someone like John Kennedy speaks. Not because he's trying to own anyone, not because he's selling something, but because the truth, in its rarest form, doesn't need a billboard. It just needs a moment of courage. That moment came when Senator Kennedy sat before CNN's Casey Hunt and refused to pretend. Now you've heard parts of the interview before, but what unfolded wasn't just political theater. It was a moral rupture, something real, raw, uncomfortable in all the right ways. We've been circling around Jeffrey Epstein's legacy of horror for years now. The child trafficking, the silence, the influence, the strange coincidences and the sudden suspicious death in federal custody. And yet, with every turn, we run into the same brick wall. Where are the names? Who were the men, the powerful, connected men, who stood in the shadows of Epstein's crimes, taking what they wanted while the world looked away? We still don't know, and somehow everyone stopped asking. Except John Kennedy didn't. He didn't throw fire. He didn't rage. He simply said something we're not supposed to say out loud. The American people are entitled to know. That's it. That's the whole revolution right there. Because we've all been gaslit into thinking that asking questions, real ones, makes us dangerous, paranoid, unreasonable. But isn't it more dangerous to stop asking? Why is it that when the names of abusers in the entertainment world hit the public, we demand action, but when it comes to Epstein's network, suddenly the water turns murky? Kennedy's point was this: justice doesn't get to hide behind closed doors and expect trust. It doesn't work that way. Not anymore. And when he said, show us the receipts, he wasn't just talking about Epstein, he was talking about everything. All of it. Because we live in a country where the powerful write the rules, bend the truth, and then ask the rest of us to play along. Where institutions fail upward. Where investigations vanish. Where misconduct becomes legacy, and legacy becomes untouchable. What Kennedy said in that moment broke a rule, an unspoken one. Don't challenge the system. Criticize the people in it, sure. Take swings at your political enemies, but never shine a light too brightly on the gears that make it all turn. He did anyway. And the result wasn't a headline. It was a fracture, a ripple of doubt in the armor of silence that protects the elite. Because what we're seeing in slow motion is the collapse of credibility. How many times can we be told, trust the process, while the process fails the people it's supposed to serve? How many times can justice be delayed or denied before we realize we're not looking at justice at all? This is the question Kennedy's presence raised, intentionally or not. And let's be clear, this isn't about whether you love or hate John Kennedy. This isn't about Republican or Democrat. This is about the value of a voice that dares to challenge the sacred hush around abuse of power. It's about remembering that speaking plainly is not a weakness. It's not a lack of sophistication. It's not being folksy, it's being honest. And honesty is in short supply. We live in a media ecosystem that feeds off conflict but starves the truth, that builds narratives faster than facts, that buries the question beneath the answer it wants you to believe. But the Epstein story and every silence surrounding it cuts through that. It's not something that should be left behind in headlines from last year. It's a living wound. And every time we let it scab over without justice, we send a message that some people are too big to fall. Kennedy, in his own strange, metaphor-laced way, said no. He said that the law must mean something, that the people who trafficked children should be in prison, and the people who enabled it should be dragged into the daylight. He said it without flinching, and it made a difference. Not because the world changed overnight, but because people noticed. They noticed that the words felt different, not slick, not rehearsed, not shaped by a PR team, just real. And isn't that what we've been craving? A moment of realness in the sea of artifice? There's a reason why his phrase, "they've dug up more snakes than they can kill," stuck. It's not just colourful, it's accurate, because once you pull one thread of truth, more start unravelling, and soon the whole fabric starts to fray. The snakes come out, and they don't like the light. That's why Kennedy's clarity is dangerous, not to the public, but to the people who prefer the rest of us stay confused, divided, and distracted. Because if we stop arguing about left versus right, and start asking about right versus wrong, they lose control of the script. And if we start demanding receipts, not just on Epstein, but on everything hidden behind red tape and reputation, we might start seeing just how deep the rot really goes. That's the power of one clear voice in a room full of noise. That's why Kennedy's words matter, because no matter how unpopular the truth is, it doesn't stop being the truth. And sometimes it only takes one voice to remind us. So here we are, staring into that silence again. Do we accept it, or do we echo back Kennedy's challenge, not with party loyalty or political spin, but with something deeper, with resolve, with questions, with memory? Because if we forget this, we lose more than truth. We lose the right to ever ask for it again. Some truths don't die, they're just buried alive. You've probably felt it, the itch behind your eyes, the knot in your gut, that moment when the media suddenly drops a story they spent weeks shouting about. Just disappears, no resolution, no accountability, just gone. And deep down, we all know why. Because the people who make the most noise about justice are often the same ones who go quiet when it becomes inconvenient. Take the Epstein story. At first, it was everywhere. The mansion, the island, the victims. The horror was too loud to ignore. But as the details became more specific, as the client list crept closer to names we know, trust, or idolize, the coverage dimmed. Not because there wasn't more to uncover, but because what was left to uncover threatened the very structure holding up the stage. And that's where we arrive at the most dangerous silence in modern life. The silence of the press. This isn't a screed against journalists. Good ones still exist. Brave ones still risk everything. But the media machine? The one owned by conglomerates, funded by elite donors, curated for corporate sponsors? That machine has no appetite for truths that burn its own house down. And John Kennedy? He stepped into that silence and made a sound the system hates most. A clear, unfiltered question. If there's nothing to hide, then why are we still in the dark? Let's stop pretending we don't know what that question costs. Because the moment you ask it, publicly, on air, without flinching, you challenge not just your opposition but your industry, your comfort, your access. And in Kennedy's case, you challenge the very media outlet hosting the conversation. That's a rare move, risky, reckless, some might say, but necessary. Because the truth is this. The same institutions that once existed to hold power accountable now often exist to protect it, or at the very least, manage the optics of it. Ask yourself, why did the Epstein client list go quiet? Why haven't the names been made public? Why do we still know more about what Epstein owned than who he served? The media didn't forget. They didn't lose interest. They made a choice. Because when the truth implicates billionaires, former presidents, tech moguls, royalty, and celebrities, truth suddenly becomes a liability. And so the focus shifts. We get distractions, manufactured outrage, stories designed to inflame, divide, or distract, anything but inform. It's not journalism, it's theatre. And while we fight over crumbs, the real criminals dine in silence. That's why what Kennedy said cut through the noise, not because it was new, not because it was shocking, but because it was honest. And honesty is dangerous in a system built on illusion. He said what most of us have been screaming into the void: justice must show us the receipts. Not one day, Not in redacted form, not with a carefully crafted press release, now fully, publicly. Because if justice means anything, it must be uncomfortable. It must reach the highest towers, not just the lowest rungs, and it must not stop where the money starts. So why hasn't it? Why do the names stay sealed? Why do the interviews stop short? Why does the media, so bold about celebrity scandals and political gaffes, go pale when asked to pursue the truth about systemic child exploitation? Because they know who they're protecting. And it's not you. It's not the victims. It's not even the concept of justice. It's access. The golden pass to interviews, invitations, and influence. That's the real currency. That's the real crime. And Kennedy, in one interview, with one sentence, threatened to devalue it. He didn't rant, he didn't accuse. He simply refused to forget. And in a world so eager to move on, that refusal is its own kind of rebellion. Because here's what silence protects: power. And here's what questions destroy: illusion. So when someone like Kennedy questions why justice hasn't come for the men behind Epstein, it sends a tremor through every network, every newsroom, every boardroom with something to lose. That's why they don't want you to keep talking about it. That's why they tell you the case is closed. That's why they flood your feed with noise so you forget what silence feels like. But don't forget. Don't let the machine erase what matters. Don't let the media convince you that outrage over trivial things is more urgent than exposing men who paid to rape children. The receipts matter. The names matter. The justice that never came still matters. And the people who protect the silence, they matter too. Because they've made a choice to serve the powerful instead of the public, to spin stories instead of follow them, to entertain instead of inform. And that's not just a betrayal, it's a collapse of trust, of truth, of the very foundation of democracy. If the press won't ask the questions, we must. If the names won't be released, we must keep demanding. And if the media stays silent, we must become louder. Kennedy didn't save the world in one interview. He didn't solve the mystery or deliver a perfect moral lesson. But he cracked something. And through that crack, the light's trying to get in. Help it. Remember what they want you to forget. And never let silence win. Walking into the fire, Senator Kennedy versus the media narrative. There's a moment, a flicker, really, right before an interview begins. Cameras are already rolling, the mics are live, and the subject of scrutiny adjusts in their seat. That flicker is where truth either hides or steps forward. The silence between the names. There's a strange kind of quiet that follows an avalanche. The third blow, truth, power, and the price of speaking plainly. By now it's clear, the Epstein scandal isn't just about what happened behind closed doors. It's about the machinery that allowed it, and still allows others to operate above consequence. Manufactured outrage, media silence, the cowardice that protects power. There's something eerily consistent about the way truth dies in public. Legacy or lie, what we leave behind when we stop demanding truth. So here we are, 5 interviews, hundreds of questions, and still silence. Not because the answers aren't out there, but because no one with power seems willing to speak them. John Kennedy did something unusual in today's political theater. He didn't hide behind partisan curtains. He didn't weaponize vagueness or dodge accountability. He pointed to the rot, not just in one party, not just in one institution, but in the very system that pretends to serve justice while shielding itself from it. And now, we have to ask ourselves, what do we do with that truth? Do we turn it into another trending clip, another moment that gets chewed up by the 24-hour news cycle and spat out by algorithms? Or do we let it mark something deeper, a shift in how we remember, demand, and hold accountable? Because what we're fighting now isn't just corruption. It's erosion of trust, of belief, of the collective will to care. And that erosion is by design. When systems fail, the fallback is confusion. Keep the people guessing, distracted, numb. Let them believe nothing can change, so they stop trying. But Kennedy's voice, imperfect, flawed, and all too human, reminds us that speaking up does matter. Even when no one seems to listen, especially then. Because silence doesn't just protect power, it becomes it, and we're dangerously close to forgetting the difference. This isn't just about Epstein anymore, it's about what his story revealed. It's about the people who got away, and the mechanisms that helped them. It's about the lists we never saw, the files still sealed, the testimonies that vanished, and the quiet agreements made behind closed doors to make sure we never see the full picture. If you think that's just a glitch in the system, think again. It is the system, and unless we tear away its mask, it will keep functioning exactly as designed. Kennedy's refusal to toe the line mattered not because it solved the problem, but because it acknowledged it, in public, where we could hear it. That's more than most have done. And as citizens, as viewers, as people who still believe that justice has a heartbeat, we owe it to ourselves not to let that moment fade. Ask the questions, demand the answers, refuse to forget. Because when we stop asking, when we start accepting silence as resolution, we don't just lose accountability, we lose our legacy, and we replace it with a lie. The lie that power will police itself, the lie that justice finds its own way, the lie that the truth eventually surfaces on its own. It doesn't. It needs us. It needs pressure. It needs memory. And most of all, it needs voices that won't go quiet just because it's easier. So here's the real question, now that the noise has faded. What kind of country do we want to be? One that remembers? One that demands? One that acts? Or one that closes the tab, changes the channel and moves on? The decision isn't up to Kennedy or the media or the courts. It's up to us. What we remember, what we ask for, what we refuse to ignore. That will determine whether this story ends in silence or in justice. And I still believe it's not too late, but time is running out.